On the podcast today, we are going to speak about the mental health problems in the world. And obviously mental health has become such a big problem in the world, not just because of the current situation, but it's been around for a long time. And we're also going to highlight the fact that Eastern spirituality is a kind of an expert way of dealing with healing some of these mental health problems, even though a lot of Eastern spirituality is not kind of promoted by the medical industry and so forth and so on. But as we know, and as probably most people listening and watching know, that, you know, practices like meditation and self-inquiry and so forth and so on are heightened ways of dealing with the mental health problems and issues that we go through in our life.
Yes, a lot of people, I guess, try to find the answer or solution through go and see like counselors, like for instance, a psychologist or psychiatrists. But again, like those people can give you some help, I believe, but I don't think that they are entirely able to give you ultimate solution. I don't believe, because their practices are based on very clinical textbook-like ideas, so that whenever they get to see patients, they apply their clinical ideas of practice to everyone. So there is no idea of case-by-case kind of thing.
Like a generic template for everybody.
Yes, that's right. And try to diagnose people's problem based on the textbook framework, so that there is no room to move. And for example, like we watched the documentary on food the other day, and this psychologist, I think she was, and she herself going through some mental health problems as she was going through the menopause. But she herself was a trained doctor from Harvard, I think, but she didn't get taught about anything about the food, how food related to our mind, right? But in Eastern spirituality, for example, in Chinese medicine, and they teach about the herbals and herbal medicines, and which is just right from the soil. So as in Hinduism as well, through Ayurveda. Ayurveda is food is medicine. This is the underlying motto, which you get to learn if you were to study Ayurveda. So that how these Eastern traditions has direct link from food to mental health, things like that. But again, the Western mind practitioners don't have such ideas, and they don't actually study that kind of stuff in their medical school, which is actually very surprising. So that it's not a holistic method to approach solve mental problems. So that again, like it has its place. Definitely, it can give you some like a big dope of big bullet points to reflect on your own mind, right? Oh, this is why this was like this, and this kind of small realizations. But again, I don't think it's a long-term, lasting solution. It can motivate you to do certain work within yourself, but it doesn't have that ultimate solution kind of power, I don't think.
No. Well, that's what you highlight an important fact that we wanted to cover actually in this podcast, was that this psychiatry and psychology, even if we look at transpersonal psychology, right? Transpersonal psychology is almost paradoxical when you look at the wording, because especially from an Eastern spiritual perspective, because when you talk about transpersonal, you're talking about transpsychological. So some of the flaws of the Western approach, or the modern approach, I should say, of addressing mental health issues is we're trying to keep people in a certain mold of personality or persona system to fit the culture or society, where obviously a lot of the mind sciences in the East are trying to tell you to break free of like cultural boundaries, social norms, and so forth and so on, right? Like Lao Tzu left society because, he's not attracted to. He understands that society warps our nature. Socialization itself inculcates mental health problems. And this is a lot of things that people don't talk about because it's kind of taboo in the psychiatric field, in psychology, because I guess in some sense, like, because society don't want you just to walk away from society and be free, or to be free from the social and cultural norms that supposedly define us, right? So the mind scientists are telling us that socialization itself warps our nature and actually causes the problems. And so that's the depth that we need to go to, because like you mentioned, like if you go in to see a psychiatrist, you'll get some bullet points and this and that, and it will be helpful, right? But a lot of the underlying issues won't go away, and you might end up falling back into the same habits that got you into that place in the first place, right? So as we know with Eastern spirituality, they just take the rug and pull it straight out from under your feet. And that's because they're addressing that the personality itself, the persona system, and the way that you behave and what you believe and the obsession we have about ourselves are causing the problems for yourself, because we are super obsessed with our own self-image. We're super obsessed with how people think of us and, how we appear to others. And, we want to fit into certain groups through certain beliefs. And as I said in that live stream a few weeks ago, I said that you need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. That there has to be a real emphasis of that, like, and not in the sense of like being a hero and this and that, but learning to have, stability in your own being, like where if the wind comes, you're not blown here or there, and if troubles happen in the world, you're not vexed by them, and you're not like moved by them, because you're stable in your own being.
Yeah, in the Western mind science, I think the furthest possible, furthest and the best solution, which combined with a little bit of a spiritual practice, is an individuation process, which Carl Jung addressed.
Yep.
And I think actually the furthest point that a Western study can get to fix our mental problem, I think. Yep. Again, but the individuation process is including, like, again, analyzing your dreams, which means that you go into your subconscious, unconscious mind, look into what's there and what's causing the problem, and this and that, so that it does go into quite a deeper level. But as you mentioned it before, Western psychology or psychiatry practice is a good help for individual to sustain the position that they're at. So somewhat you conforming to the social norms and cultural habits and your position in many relationships that you currently have is kind of fundamental. Like you conform to them first, and then you find a peace within it.
Yeah. And
I think that's the individuation process, so that individual don't have much of a mental problems to sustain that position. Yeah. Right. So it helps in certain extent, but I don't think it's limited. It's limited. It doesn't go all the way into your ultimate freedom, which is what our Eastern tradition goal is, right? So it will give you certain amount of peace to maintain your position in the society and relationships, but it doesn't have the greater power to get to the spiritual freedom, and which means that you are literally, psychologically and spiritually free from everything, free of your own conditioning, free of your own deep within the vasanas and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And like everyone's, like you mentioned earlier, because psychology, psychiatry, all of that, they use a generic template. And so even if we think about when they, like you said, like the furthest we can go is probably individuation, like in the Jungian sense. And look, that may work for someone who's not dealing with mental health problems. You know what I mean? The idea of individuation. But if you're addressing mental health issues with that sort of, that sort of approach, that's not going to, I shouldn't say not going to, but in all likelihood, it may not work for everyone, And like to address, individuation, like I wrote something down, like to kind of explain what it is, like, because individuation itself is about like what you said, the integral whole. So individuation is the process of transformation whereby the personal and the collective unconscious are brought into consciousness to be assimilated by the whole personality, And so, okay, that sounds wonderful, right? Like that's what individuation is, but as we're addressing, that's not gonna, because that in a sense is still trying to keep a person
That's right.
in the society, and that person themselves already have problems. Now, does that mean that they can't address it through that? Of course they can, but is it going to work for everybody? And of course it's not.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like this because, like, Carl Jung himself got interested in Vedanta and Hindu philosophy himself.
The I Ching, Taoism,
Exactly.
everything. Yeah.
But because he's a psychiatrist, right? So that he wanted to implement these studies into his own practice, so that what he could come up with the individuation that is a kind of ultimate goal within his practice of psychiatry, right? But my question is that if he found the answer on good tips to find out the process called individuation through Eastern study, why don't you just study
Eastern spirituality? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Traditional practices, like
I guess
straight up. Yeah.
Well, I guess there are benefits when you do mix, Western thought and Eastern thought,
yeah.
obviously. But in speaking what we're speaking about, then it's it kind of doesn't work in some sense because, like, if we look at, especially if we look at let's have a look at the evolution of the East, right? Who have always had that knowledge, depression and stress and all this and that were not as high as what they are now. Stress in life back in the old days was the stress to, acquire food and acquire a living. And that's still a little bit the same in some places in Asia as well. But the general mental health of the people was healthy and sane. People got along, people did what they had to do, and no one suffered because they didn't have a super self-image of themselves. They didn't live in a complex social society, where you have all of these things that you're supposed to live up to, these expectations. You better get a degree, you better, good job, and so forth and so on. And so back in the old days in the East, and even still now in some places, obviously, especially in places like Nepal and India and so forth and so on, it's not, you're not judged by, if you have a degree or if you do this.
No,
like, mainly, right, in those places, because most people are still rural people in those areas. And so that's become part of this, because that's sort of those social tenets have become part of our kind of psychological conditioning in developed countries, which is really impacting on our mental health, because you're a classic example, right? You are a straight A student and so forth and so on, scholarship, savant, and you left university after 2 years, which, especially in Korea, that's a no-no.
Yeah, I think maybe that didn't help my parents' understanding, because I had a full scholarship next semester, fully covered, but I never went back, right?
India was calling.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, But do you see, like, your example is a classic example, right? Like, and since you've done that, your whole life has been on an uptick, right? Like, if you had went down that other path, it would have been on a downtick. You would have been, who knows what you would have happened for you, but you would have followed similar pathways that don't lead to happiness, right? Like, in career is a classic example of what we're talking about, where it's such a complex society, where mental health is not considered, right? Because if you don't get a degree, you don't get a good job, you don't have a family, then you are frowned upon, not just within your family, but within society in general. You and I, we break all of those categories, so we're not very welcome over there. But nevertheless, that's a good example, right? But that's also happening all around the world, slowly but surely, right? Like, to a different degree. Like, Korea is a pretty extreme example. Like, Korea and China and Japan would be extreme examples. But even in places like America and the UK, there's still an expectation. There's still such this self-image, but it's the energy is moving through different streams. You know, like, say in America, to be successful in America, you ought to get to Hollywood, or you ought to be an athlete, and this and that. And
Wall Street.
Wall Street, you know, all of these so-called successful pathways that actually, you know, contribute in some sense a lot to mental health problems, because not everyone can be at the top of not everyone can be Leonardo DiCaprio, right, as an actor. Not everyone can. It's impossible, right? So, and we live in a world now where, because we're constantly being told that you ought to be Leonardo DiCaprio, that when you realize your own inadequacies and your own mediocrity, then you start to suffer from mental health problems. And like I've mentioned to many people before, when they ask me about my work, I always tell people I came to a conclusion very early on that I was just as mediocre as anyone else. But I could do certain things that seemed like I could do a little bit better than other people. That's all. Wasn't better or worse. I couldn't, you know, I'm not a mechanic or anything like that. They're good at, the mechanic is good at that, and so forth and so on, right? So I think that because we created a society where mediocrity is frowned upon, but in general, most of us are mediocre.
That's the reality.
That's the reality. You know, some of us weren't fortunate to have a basketball in our hands when we were 3 or 4 years old, and we could become LeBron James, right? Some of us didn't have that fortune, right? And so some of us were just, like most of us, are you and I the same, and probably most people listening and watching, we're kind of just moving through life. You're young, you don't really know what's going on. You just sort of move with it, and some things happen and you get interested in certain things and you go that way. Where other people come into life and they've given a violin from when they're 2 years old, and then they become Sarah Chung, you know what I mean? So, but see, the problem is that we create the world where you should be Sarah Chung. You should be LeBron James. You should be Jonathan Thurston. You should be all of these people. And it's like, yeah, but they had their own life path. And most of us are just sort of like wanderers, right? The 99.999% of the population of the world are wanderers. We wander through life and we find things, and that's actually what makes an epic journey. But we're kind of diminishing that epic journey that we're all having in life.
Yeah, again, as you mentioned, that how society creates this image of yourself constantly through social media and whatnot. And they put great light on rich people or celebrities and this and that, and they somewhat really encourage you to strive to be like those people, right? And a lot of us actually do. Like, we found out to be good at something, and you go all in that path and try to. Sometimes you're like not within your means, just you push all the way through and this and that. Again, like in a scene in Hollywood, we've been to Hollywood, we know how it's like. And again, in New York City, Wall Street and all these places, they're full of people who have lots, like big ambitions. and this and that. And in some sense, it's not a negative thing.
No.
They all have right to have all this ambition to make some good life for themselves and this and that. But someone said this, that underlying that mind, the psychology of that, is in insecurity.
Yeah.
That's what we...
Self-esteem issues.
Yeah, self-esteem issues. And like, for example, most unemployed job is actors, right? Actors and actors.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all these people who have no name, but they just had a few roles, small roles here and there, and extras, and try to become like Leonardo DiCaprio or Nicole Kidman, all these big celebrities. It's good to have dreams and things like that, but like if you when you constantly chase the dream, and in Hollywood you go audition after audition, audition after audition, you fail, you don't get picked all the time, and that scene itself is like a symbol of like how insecure so many people are. You know, like you strive to be like someone in the movies, but even when you so-called made it, like I think that's when you have more insecurity in your mind, because you don't want to lose what you've achieved, right? But entertainment industry is one of those things. One day you were there, one day you're not there, right? So the insecurity issue is there. Even people so-called who made it, I think, and also even rich people, like someone like Grant Cardone, for example. He was really shaking his hand when he lost like a 20 million.
He had 10 million left in the bank.
In the bank, yes, yeah, that's right. 10 million in the bank. Oh, okay. Well,
And he was worried.
Yeah, and he was worried.
Oh my God.
Like that kind of insecurity is something that I think is a blind spot that we don't think too much about it. Right? Whereas if you were to concentrate on, like you mentioned, that when you're aware that you are a mediocre person, then you don't have everything, but I am good at some things.
Some things, yeah.
So if I put some work in it, I can maybe do something with it. This main mindset is much, much healthier and much suitable for your personal situation and your path yourself. So rather, to be honest, 95% people are like that, I think. Only 5% who like got given a tennis racket at 3 years old, and instrument at 2 years old, and
They're a unique case, aren't they? That's not the average.
Yes.
There's not many Djokovic's going around. There's only one Novak,
only
one Novak Djokovic, right? So, so it's very unique, right?
Yeah,
like
that's right.
We all weren't blessed with that opportunity, but at the same time, me saying blessed is also wrong as well, because we were blessed with life. So what I should say is we just didn't have that sort of fortune to follow like a specific path, And see, like we mentioned, like Sarah Chung or Novak Djokovic, they had that specific path because it was kind of just given to them, right, by their parents. It wasn't even, you could say it wasn't in some sense about ambition. It's like when I was young and I had a rugby league football, and, just kicking around, just love it. Kicking around the backyard, and you don't do it for ambition. You're doing it because this is fun. You're a kid, this is life. Same with them, with both of those individuals, right? And so it becomes ambition when we get older, and then we have all of these ideas of wanting to succeed. So, if Zhuangzi was sitting here, the third person in the podcast, he'd, like, as you were mentioning before, with ambition, he would be talking about, like what you were talking about with self-esteem, and that he'd be saying, why do you even have that ambition? What's the ambition about? Because that's fundamentally where the problems begin. You have something to prove in the world.
Again, that's the insecurity.
And that's the insecurity, self-esteem problems, right? And so then we need to be able to discern between something that we actually just naturally enjoy, and that we find great joy in, that we do, and that we don't care what people think about it. But often our ambitions are about, acquiring wealth, fame, jumping the ladder, of status and so forth and so on. So, and that's where that's where the insecurity things and that begin. You know, that's like when Cal Newport talked about a story about a blacksmith he met in the countryside. I can't remember where he was. And this guy was an expert. He's blacksmith, right? And he makes these swords that are just like mint, you know, like no one's ever made a sword like this. And he just
all handcrafted.
All handcrafted, just a random guy in the countryside. But Cal said that when he pulled it out of the fire and he looked up at the sword, there was a look in his eyes that you couldn't get if you were trying to, you know, be successful on Wall Street or be the best actor in the world. It was just a sense of like awe and satisfaction from just something that he's good at, but he doesn't get recognition for it, right? Because he's that comfortable, he doesn't need recognition.
Right.
And you and I personally, and as most people probably know on the podcast, is that the most sane and healthy people we've seen in the world are people in the rural areas of India and Nepal and Thailand and, you know, Myanmar and Laos and Cambodia, places like this, where the people don't have ideas of like, you know, fame and wealth and fortune and status, and they are comfortable with the way they are, right? And so I get this a lot, you know, in the YouTube comment section where people will, you know, go fly off wild at me and stuff like this and not know why I don't care about certain things and this and that. And I just tell them, like, I was loved by both my parents. I don't need like this and that and the other.
You don't need big attention from the public and
no. I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
Like, you and I could walk away from this tomorrow and we're still happy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't think people understand that sort of mentality.
Yeah.
And someone said it a while back, and a lot of it comes back to not being loved by their parents and so forth and so on. That's where a lot of like ambition issues and this and that. I think that's partly true, but not totally true. Because socialization in general is driving you to the American dream, right? America is a classic case of like, you ought to live up to this expectation, and if you don't, you're a failure. And the problem is the world has started to take all of that on, and we're seeing the increase of mental health problems go through the roof, and no one's really addressing the elephants in the room, which is, you know, what we are talking about here. So
yeah, a few weeks ago I watched this documentary series made in Korean, from Korean broadcasting place, and because the happiness is such an issue in Korea, as you mentioned before, the documentary was about like, are Koreans happy? And they're not. Why they aren't happy, and this and that. So they went through a lot of things, and they visited Denmark. Denmark, how the education system is structured, and how the society basically function in a sense, you know. And they interviewed two different group of people. One would be like someone who chose to become a bricklayer, and this young teenage girl at age 15, she decided to become a carpenter, and then going into school to become a carpenter, making her own tables and things like that, working with wood and things like that. That's what she wants to do. And making that sort of decision is not anything good or bad by Danish society. Like, and again, another person they interviewed was just, again, a young teenage boy who does like a building, to become a builder. And there's one of the reporter asked him like, don't you feel that you want to become like a rich person or something, or do like a doctor, become a doctor, or lawyers or whatever, and they have this high status job and get respected by people in society and this and that. And his eyes were like, Mom, I have no clue, that sort of ideas. His eyes were like, what you're talking about. He basically said, that's good for them, but that's not good for me. This is what I like to do. And things like that. And the society in Denmark itself is built on, like, if you were to be a doctor or something like that, they make a huge income, then you pay huge amount of tax as well.
Yeah.
So that yearly earning is no different from being a doctor or a bricklayer.
Bricklayer, yeah, exactly.
And they also interviewed this couple. They're doctors, both are doctors. And maybe they lived a little bit bigger house, maybe a bit, their backyard is a bit bigger than other people's house and this and that. But their mentality was same. They were saying that we pay so much tax because we earn a lot of money, and they didn't seem they are too bitter about it. And they felt that they have some sort of obligation to contribute to society from being a doctor. And that is a kind of a responsibility they take on as they becoming a doctor in a position in the society as well. So they have all these greater perspective from what they do, instead of having all these pride with their occupation and look down on people like a bricklayers, for example. So you purely become a doctor or bricklayer because you want to, not because of social status or the money. That's not the motivation at all. Those jobs you choose only because you like it, you want it to become that, so that you became that profession.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was really like completely different outlook from the rest of the world. So that's something that like we all need to think about, I think.
Well, that's why Alain de Botton said Denmark is a society made for losers. And he's not saying losers as in like a real loser, but like meaning that what you said, like it's made for like just a good life for the average person. It's a good life for the average person, and there's not much of a mentality of like, you know, being up here and so forth and so on. Like you said, with like you could be a bricklayer or a doctor, and the wealth gap is not too vast. In Australia here, it would be through the roof, right? There'd be no doubt. Doctors living in a mansion, bricklayers living in an apartment like you and I. You know what I mean? So, and I think that, because in you mentioning that, I think one of the things which is interesting is that, and this runs counter to just the nature of nature itself, is we're making societies with certainty in mind. So this is how it's going to be. But as we know, life is uncertain. Life is unpredictable. Why are we not creating social systems and cultures based on uncertainty and unpredictability? Because that's the way life really is. It doesn't even matter even if you were Novak Djokovic and you had the path like this, uncertainty and unpredictability is still going to play out in his life. He just has one thing that he's been given from birth that he's good at, well, he became good at.
In a sense that path is much more difficult.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because I'm sure he has other things that he's good at, but let's say if he doesn't have much, then tennis is the only way that you can make a living. Then you have to win much more stress and much more pressure and much more mental issues that might give it to you, right?
Well, look at Daniel Day-Lewis, right? One of the greatest actors probably of all time, probably the greatest actor of all time, and he's just bored, just walks away from it. What's he doing? Oh, he's making shoes. He's
Yeah, that was really out of it. Like what he does in his spare time. I mean, now he's retired from acting, but
and that's what he does full time.
oh,
So, you know what I mean? Like, but he gets extreme joy out of making shoes.
yeah.
And there has to be people who do get joy out of making shoes, because otherwise we wouldn't have shoes to wear.
But the thing is, like, nowadays everything replacing the machine. The shoes are made by machine, but he likes to
Do it the old school way.
old school way, and that's actually, to me, that's so amazing. Actually, yeah.
But that's the joy that you can extract from following things that are not expected of you, but are something that is sort of an intrinsic drive for yourself, or an intrinsic You get an intrinsic joy from doing that. Obviously, for Daniel Day-Lewis, he gets joy from making shoes. For you and I, it would be like tough work. It's not our thing.
Yeah.
But podcasting wouldn't be his thing either, and whatever we do. So, that you have to, life should have been designed with with keeping uncertainty in mind, not this certainty. And that's what happens when you create an artificial goal for society, like the American dream, that everyone ought to aspire to achieve. And as we know, let's look at America as an example. Hardly anyone achieves that American dream. Hardly anyone, right? Because there's a lot of poor people in America. There's a lot of people who live on minimum wage and so forth and so on. So they're not living this American dream because they've built this society based on certainty. This is a certain fact. You ought to get the American dream. And it's like, but I'm making, $10 an hour. Yeah. How is it possible? So you're not, see, the socialization and everything was not designed on keeping everybody in mind. It was designed to keep certain systems like capitalism and so forth and so on ticking. Now, I'm not saying that capitalism is evil and so forth and so on. It's the best that we got at this moment. So, we do as we can with it. But, like, just the way the structure and everything was set up is not beneficial for everyone. And somewhere like Denmark is a great example of what can happen if we think about uncertainty and if we take everybody into account in the country.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, as you mentioned, culture and socialization is not for individual.
No.
Origin of society itself was even for collective good, for collective benefit. It wasn't for individual. So that once the world has more population, and then the world becomes more complex, and society becomes bigger and more problems. So then naturally governing body have to give more regulations to keep the society sane and healthy, right? And then try to create whether that's artificial or natural, the culture has to be there to bond the people together so that it makes the job easier for them to govern a nation or society. So, yeah, culture and socialization is never for individual benefit, I don't believe. So that, so again, so that Western some psychologists and things like that, it just based on the template of to be a sane human being under a certain social norm, which is actually completely ignoring the individualism of that person, right?
Yeah.
So that's where all the problem begins.
Well, it becomes problematic because the thing is, if you look at somewhere like America, and I think America has 350 million people, to think that all 350 million people are going to subscribe to that way of life, that culture, that socialization, I mean, you're naive if you think everyone's going to subscribe to that. Yeah. And it can't happen. Maybe if it's 20 people in a tribe, of course, Like if you look at some of the more ancient cultures, like if we look at Hinduism and Hindu culture, Sanatana Dharma, then majority of Hindus identify with that culture because it's so old and it's so ingrained, But in saying that, as we see in India, it does not serve everyone. It might serve the majority, and there are certain things that, like for example, like if you do follow, say, a culture like Sanatana Dharma, that because you have like a lot of those ingrained beliefs, that can also, help anxiety and stress and so forth and so on, because you have your worldview is much more clear of how life is. You know what I mean? All is Brahman. So but those sorts of ancient cultures are very, what do you say? Like they're very rare these days because we've kind of stepped into more capitalistic cultures where it's focused on materialism and acquiring wealth and fame and status and so forth and so on. And so India, for example, is a completely different kettle of fish, outside of Mumbai and Delhi and Kolkata and Chennai and those sorts of places. But so, like a lot of this could segue into a next part that we're going to talk about, but a lot of the problems with mental health are those beliefs and this and that. And then, as Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, the chase and the hunt maddens your heart, right? So we're going after this life, and it maddens your heart. He's saying this, or whoever or whatever the Lao Tzu was, 2,500, 600 years ago. And so, society was not even close to as complex as it is now.
Yeah.
So if he understood that it maddens our heart back then, if he was alive now, he'd be just like, wow, he'd fall off the chair. He'd be dumbfounded. It doesn't just madden the heart, it turns it into a rotten piece of wood, So because, it's twofold, right, this problem that we have with mental health. So socialization and culture is telling you should be a certain way, and your intrinsic nature is saying a different thing, right? It's like, it's like Confucianism, right? Like Confucianism is telling you that you need to cultivate to become natural and all of this sort of nonsense, but you don't. And so, we know this deep down in our hearts that we're all good, right? We know this when we're a kid, we're good, And a lot of people who have psychedelic experiences, if you have the 5-MeO toad DMT and this and that, that everything's good. It's all good. But some of us need to be blasted into the afterlife to realize that, oh man, what was I worrying about? You know what I mean? Like, I was possessed by my own self-image and so forth and so on. And so the culture is telling you to have these beliefs, to apply your life to it, to chase that goal. And then what does it do? What's the second aspect of that? The chase and the hunt maddens your heart. You become so busy that your nervous system is not designed to be thinking all the time and doing all the time. And there's no wonder people just freak out and have schizophrenic breaks and lose their mind.
People uncharacteristic disease at early age and things like that.
Yeah.
You're just using your engine too much.
Yeah. Well, one of my good friends suffered from schizophrenia at 19, you know what I mean? Like, and I know 18, 19, 20 is kind of the sweet spot for schizophrenia to develop, but it happened. And, and in some sense, my friend's case was a lot to do with trying to keep up with what was acceptable in that environment he was in, which was a sporting environment. And so he was a bit younger, people are a bit older, trying to keep up, with the drinking mentality and so forth and so on. And it just wasn't for him, right? And so this busyness, that we have created for ourselves is killing us, right? And we see this with that if we look at the nervous system, where we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, we are only leaning into one over the other. So the sympathetic nervous system is what is activated when we are in action and we're doing. It's kind of, you could say, the fight. It's related to fight or flight response. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is activated when we're not doing anything. It's more so related to the feed and breed and digestive mentalities, right? So, and the problem is at what we are seeing, and Buddhists and Hindus especially have been talking about this for thousands of years, is that we're leaning into one way over the other. So we have, we're only activating the sympathetic nervous system, and the only time we access the parasympathetic nervous system is when we sleep. And usually our sleep is terrible. And so we're not accessing it that much, and then we're waking up fatigued, and then we're smashing a coffee, and we're doing everything which is destroying the nervous system itself, which is destroying your vitality, your very presence. It's diminishing it. You're becoming a very dim light. And so we're making a society with a bunch of dim lights walking around in the world, trying to converse and trying to achieve goals, and their light is dim. Not that they're a dim-witted person, just that they're worn out from the chase and the hunt, from the beliefs they have that they should, achieve. Whereas meditation and everything like that is about nourishing the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah. When you chase these social goals and things like that, you naturally don't even think about how to activate parasympathetic nervous system.
It'd be odd, wouldn't it, to say that?
Yeah, that's not part of not on their list.
No.
But why that's important is to help your healthy and sane mind, and also the healthy physical body as well. And again, scientifically proven that you need to activate those two different nervous systems equally to achieve a certain thing. For example, to be in a very deep level of concentration, or if you were to physically doing some sort of work or mental work, whatever you're trying to do, if you're not activating both nervous system equally, then it's out of balance. So that's kind of very fundamental to understand, and again, scientifically proven, so that we are all responsible to do that for our own sanity.
Yeah. Well, I used to, in Fasting the Mind, I used the chocolate milkshake analogy. So a lot of people, when they hear what you and I are saying, they think, oh, so we're supposed to spend half a day meditating. It's like, no, you missed the point. You missed the point entirely. It's related to, like I mentioned with the milkshake, it's like, say, if we were to do 50-50, right? 50% chocolate powder, 50% milk in a blender, it's going to be, it's going to be quite a mess.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty thick.
It's going to be thick, it's going to be gluggy. But then if you put just enough chocolate powder and obviously a lot more milk, then you have a delicious chocolate milkshake. And that's actually how the nervous system is. You don't need to meditate for 5 hours a day, but if you incorporate like 30 minutes to an hour or something a day, that's enough to nourish the parasympathetic nervous system. But also, in tandem with that, if you're practicing satipatthana through the day, mindfulness, if you're practicing mindfulness, as much as you can throughout the day, you're accessing the parasympathetic nervous system, because you're not letting your mind just race off and just run here and there with its thoughts, right? And so...
Yeah, for example, when people walk on the street or sitting in a public transport or something like that, instead of blocking your ears with the earphones,
music,
just get rid of it all. Just to be present that moment while you walk, just to look around and listen to, not really listen to, you just be aware what's going on around you. Whatever noise that's there, it's there. And you're just purely aware of it. You just be fully being present with it.
Just be there.
Yeah, just be there, exactly.
That's how we have been for long, since the dawn of time.
Yeah. But whereas once we plug something in and play music or even listening podcasts or audiobooks, you think that would help your, learning or whatever you're doing. But I still think that without having those resting time for your brain and mind while body is in motion, although that you think it's important to listen to the educational content, I don't think you can absorb much of the content that you're listening to. If you were to learn and listen or read or something like that, just sit down and allocate some time for it. In that sense, it's much more effective than while you're on the foot or on a public transport, listening or whatever. I don't think that's as much effective. It's actually counter-effective. You're not resting and you're not concentrating either. So you might as well just get rid of it all and just sit, just be there that moment.
Exactly. So what you're doing when you're doing that is you're causing this almost like a schizophrenic break in your mind, because one part of your mind is focusing on the environment. The other part of your mind's focusing on what's going on with this podcast or music or whatever's going on. So you're causing this schizophrenic split in your mind, which is causing so much anxiety inside you. And people say, I'm just going for a relaxing walk, I'm going to listen to some music. And it's like, take the music out of your ears. It's not doing you any favour because, first of all, there's one part of yourself that's got to observe the environment. And that's all that should be happening, not something else in the background. If you were to go for a walk and I was going to sit there and walk alongside you and just gibber in your ear, like nonsensical stuff, sooner or later you'd be like, hey,
Really
look,
annoying.
can you get out of here? Like, what are you doing, you psychopath? But that's what you're doing. You're putting something there. They might not be yelling in your ear, but they're speaking to you, and but you're focusing on the road, and you're focusing on, hopefully nothing falls out of a building, whatever, So, and you've got this thing playing in your thing. It does you no favors. It's destroying your nervous system.
Exactly.
It's like you said, there needs to be ample time to allow your mind to rest. And as you and I know from spending time in monasteries and living in great places, like, I often think about Tiri, the times we've been there, I'll be sitting on top of the roof of our house for hours just looking at Arunachala, just with my Rudraksha mala beads. And if someone saw me, like, from the developer, they'd be thinking, what a waste of time. But there's nothing going on. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing happening. Like, there's no thoughts. It's just like, you're just there. You're just present. And there's no thought of like, I should do this, I shouldn't do that. I'm just there.
This is a funny thing. It's just a story. Not really a story. What's happening over in Korea is that there's a bunch of scientists who found out the fact that how parasympathetic nervous system is so important to develop our studies and this and that. Since the Korean being very highly educational place and very competitive, and this bunch of people created the competition. They create the competition so that to figure out who can stay the longest doing nothing.
Oh,
Yeah, they create it's a legitimate competition. It's for real. It's like a competition for math or English or anything like that. It's a competition. But that is to say now, so people start to recognize how important it is to do nothing.
yeah.
Just to rest your brain. Resting your brain is so important, so that your mind gets clearer, and you can think clear, and your sleep is better, right? And whatever you do, it's more efficient. Like when you were trying to do something with a lot of distractions in the background, it might take, like, let's say, 3 hours to complete. But without distraction, with the clearer mind, it'll take less than half, probably. So the work becomes much more efficient, easier. It comes easier for you because your mind is clear. And once it got done, you can do next task or you just relax. It's just better for you.
I wrote Fasting the Mind in a month. Well, 6 weeks to be specific. If I put up the editing and typing, but then 6 weeks.
And that's the time when you are trying to implement that idea of just more efficiency.
More efficiency, yeah. And what we're talking about now as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Applying that, and it's still like I was only doing 4 days a week.
Yeah.
You and I, for 3 days, were still gallivanting around doing whatever the hell we wanted to do.
And even that 4 days, you made a commitment with yourself not to write in the afternoon, right?
Yeah, of course.
So just to fully use the morning time when your mind is calm and clear, just use that 3 or 4 hours window in the morning, and once the lunch is done, and rest of the day is free.
Yeah, we just jump on the motorbike and gallivant around the Thailand countryside.
Exactly. And
so, I mean, and that just comes from you and I. Well, naturally, you and I don't have many distractions in general. So, well, for myself personally, and also for your development as a musician, it has been quite high from no distractions. And me writing books, the longest I've ever wrote a book was 3 months. So, it's when I speak to other people, they say it takes them 2 years to write a book and this and that, and then I inquire into their life, and then you start to realize, oh my God, like they're so busy, and there's no way that you can have a consistent train of thought and focus for too long, and actually finish the job at hand, So,
how many times do you get the question from people that, how come you get so much done. Like you're writing books, you create YouTube content, you read, and how do you do all these things? And often people might think that someone like him must do like a busy life and do this and then one after the other and like just stay busy and this and that. Not at all.
No.
It's not at all. You just give a sufficient time for yourself to rest, and you just have a certain target that you want to achieve in a day. Not too much, but just something that's achievable, you know. And once job's done. And after that, do whatever you want, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a less distraction and heighten the concentration level so that things get done a lot quicker and the quality is higher.
Yeah, people got to think about momentum. Like that was a big thing that I learned early on when I was doing a lot of this stuff was momentum. So, you know, and I was guilty of this, especially when I wrote Enlightenment Now, I was guilty of this, where I'd go in for a monster session and I'd write for 10 hours a day. And then as you were there with me, and the next day I'm just like, I'm doing nothing. I'm doing nothing a day.
For a few days.
Oh, yeah. And then next minute it gets a week, right? And you haven't picked up the pen again.
Right.
And so that's when I started to understand the allocation of energy, sympathetic energy and so forth and so on, in tandem with the parasympathetic nervous system. So then, 3 to 4, at a stretch, 5 hours a day of concentrated deep work is enough. And you don't want to go any further than that because the next day you can still do it. But if you go further, like I was doing 10 hours, you're going to be completely tapped out and there's just no way. And so, unless you're a complete madman and you don't want to go mad, so and that's a lot of people don't appreciate. You need to start to build momentum. Otherwise, you won't accomplish anything actually that is dear to you. So
I think it's important to know your limit. Like someone like, for example, Tony Robbins, for example, like someone like himself maybe can sleep 4 hours every day and achieve a lot of things. And well,
but who knows if he really does
if it's true or not. If that is true, let's say maybe that's for him, or not for everybody else,
No.
right?
Some people do have a big gas tank. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're talking about Tony Robbins, he has a lot of people working for him, and
That's true.
Like I remember someone was speaking with Joe Rogan, and Rogan was talking about in awe about how much Elon Musk can get done. But I forget who Joe's guest was, but the guest actually said, but he has a lot of people working for him. Of course he can accomplish a lot of things. He's a billionaire, you know what I mean? If anyone who's a billionaire can allocate jobs to other people, it still may be their ideas and so forth and so on. But see, this is where the problems happen, right? Because people see someone like Elon Musk and they go, wow, he's so productive and so forth and so on. How? I want to be like that too. And it's like, you can't. He's got like an army of people working for him. You are the only person. Like you're never going to achieve it.
Yeah.
Start small, do one thing at a time, So, like, as like I haven't tried to like go mad with writing books, with creating YouTube content. There has to be a healthy balance. Otherwise you just end up stopping it all and then it's over, So you have to always find a healthy balance, which helps obviously your mental health, And in the end of the day, everything and a lot of things that we will achieve in life and do in life probably won't be remembered in 100 years from now. So you have to put also things into perspective. Now, I'm not saying that in a negative sense. That should be a liberating thing. That should liberate you to go, oh man, I can just be a bit more relaxed and live my life how I want to live it,
Exactly.
And not care if I achieve this and that. If I don't achieve it, that's good. If I do achieve it, it's good too.
But that is a much more heightened perspective of seeing life, isn't it? Because that is true. The thing is, like, even whoever Elon Musk, all these people, like 1,000 years time, like he might be just be on one name in the history book, one line, one sentence in the book, and that'll be it,
And maybe in 500 years it'll disappear.
Well, that's right.
It's gone.
That's right. So that's why, in some sense, that again, like human life is very short, very just like a speck of dust.
Yep.
So that we shouldn't give too much of pressure to achieve something for ourselves. It's just, again, at the end of the day, it's all about how happy your life was, how satisfying with your own life. That's what's important. That's what I feel when I see a movie or something like that. You see someone's grave or something, or you actually get to see a cemetery or something like that. They were once upon a time alive. They had their life, and now no more. So that makes me think that, like, I wish they had a good life, right? Instead of stressing out to achieve something, chasing a dream or something like that, and unfortunately die of heart attack while at the job or something like that. How many times that happened? It happens so much,
Of course, yeah.
In the end, it's all about how happy with your own life. That's all that matters.
Well, I remember when my mum died and my sister, and you can understand this. My sister was like, "You wonder what it's all about, don't you?" Like, and my sister was talking about like how much mum did for us. Wash the dishes, wash our clothes. She was just a soldier. You know what I mean? Did everything. I mean, not just for us. She was doing things for my friends and
For others.
For others, you know what I mean? Like, she was a cleaner at a primary school, so she was, giving presents to kids. It was really, she was a saint. You know what I mean? But my sister was like, you wonder what it was all about. And at that time, because I was so young, I thought, you do, don't you? You do. But then, as I got older, I was like, but it was the quality of life she lived.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? And that's what sort of stuck with me. And that's been our mantra, the way that you and I live, is that we're not interested in, like, fame and fortune and so forth and so on. It's always about our quality of life. Are we living the life we want to be living? Are we where we want to be? This and that. And if not, we make the steps to move in the direction that feels right for us. So it's all about quality of life.
This thing, ironically, I heard from a psychologist saying that to help your self-esteem to a bit heighten up is to see and reflect back on what kind of individual you think yourself is, right? And so that when you look within yourself with your own behavior or thoughts and how you, what you do with other people and this and that, is that are you somewhat happy with it, or are you a bit ashamed? That if you are somewhat happy with it, then your self-esteem is pretty stable. If not, then maybe you need to try to make it better, like this. So that it's all about how you, I wouldn't say judging yourself, it's how you see yourself, how you want to, what kind of individual you want to be, basically, and so that how you don't get ashamed of yourself,
Yeah.
So only you know, right?
Yeah.
Nobody else knows. It's the most honest way to approach.
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's like, it's so, like, I remember Alan Watts would always talk about, like, what's the life that you want to live? I mean, it's so simple and generic, right? Like, it's, what's the life that you want to live? Like, if money was no object, what would you do? And if we take that even further, if socialization and beliefs and culture were no object, what would you want to do with your life?
That's right.
And so if there are things that you want to do with your life, but things are impeding that, then you need to make the steps necessary to live that life you want to live, And that it's so simple. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that's just how easy it is. You and I have done it many times, and you and I don't have lots of money, and we just move our life, and if that's what we want to do, that's what we do, And so sometimes there may be things that may be an obstacle, like the current situation we're in, but this will pass as well. Just with patience and perseverance, you'll get where you need to be. And so people overthink it, they overthink it, and they analyze their life too much. Oh, I can't do that. I shouldn't do that because what will mum and dad say? And then you start to become a hostage of other people's beliefs. And this is a very dangerous area. When you become a hostage of other people's perception of you, then you're already not living the life that you should be living. And that's what's happening with a lot of mental health problems. People are living a life that other people expect of them, not the life that they want.
That's right.
And that's where Lao Tzu and Confucius departed, right? Because Confucius is saying you should live that life that people expect of you. You ought to live up to the expectations of your parents and the Confucian society. Well, Lao Tzu's like, don't listen to that crazy man. He's nuts. Like, go with what's natural to you, what feels natural to you, and move in that direction. If your mum and dad don't agree with it, all well and good. That's for them to get over, not for you to get over. You know.
That's right. Me and my colleague having a conversation the other day, and she mentioned how her friend now is making like a lot of money and this and that, and like, so someone she knows, like, earning a lot of money, had lots of investments and traveling around the world and this and that, and that day on the way back home, I was just thinking like, again, like how the life would be like for him. Things would be much easier in a certain extent because of the money that person has. But I was thinking something like, for example, what you mentioned about the blacksmith before. That's like satisfied look at the sword that he created. That's something that you never can buy with
No, money
anything.
can't buy. Money can't buy.
Gold, diamond.
No,
you just
can't have it.
even billions of dollars. Like even if you had the billions of dollars, that sort of satisfaction is not something that you can buy, right? That satisfaction is coming from like a decades of work, right? Workmanship that he put in. And all the process, right? He put all the effort and heart and love and his obviously skill and time and a lot of mental energy and care and all these things into one final craft. That's something that you cannot buy with anything, and that's something I kind of somewhat little realization for me that that's something like that you can't buy with anything.
No.
Right? Like even I sometimes feel that like every time when you get published a new book, we get a bunch of book delivered, right? That it's final materialization of the fine work of months. Or the weeks.
And a long time awaiting
long time.
to get published.
And working with the publishing house and back and forth and all those process and then you have the final material that's all there.
See.
And that satisfaction is that's not something. I mean, obviously, becoming a bestseller will help, but if not, it still is a satisfaction and it's somewhat achievement that what you've done, and that's something that you can have pride for yourself and satisfaction.
Definitely. You know, like it's amazing. Like I think just for myself, like because when I think about my books, I think about where I was when I started writing them, and you know the process. I know, as you know, like with all of my 5-6 books. My next book coming out later this year. You guys will find out. I think about the whole process. I know everything about the process. So I know where I started writing it. I know where we were living. I know the process I went through back and forth with the publisher, even trying to get published, which is very difficult these days. A lot more difficult than the early days. Not early days, but a lot more difficult than decades ago for other people. You know, so there is a satisfaction that money can't buy when you get the finished product. I know that, you know what I mean, because I've experienced that personally. And like you said, okay, becoming a bestseller, that helps our livelihood. The chances of Eastern spirituality ever being a bestseller is, you know, we know the answer to that. But so there's a satisfaction just in doing what you love to do without having the monetary value on it. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, as you know, like, I don't write books stereotypically like other people. Like, so other people will write one chapter and then shop the chapter around to literary agents and publishers. I write the entire book because I don't want to ruin the process of writing the book. I want to write what I want to write. And if no one's interested in it, whatever. I still have that book and I'd put it up for free or something. I don't know, you know, what I would do.
I guess that thing, I don't think not many people are aware of that actually. Actually, a lot of people do write, like you say, introduction or first chapter. Yeah. And then they shop around. Once they get contract, they somewhat mold the rest of the chapters in a publisher's liking.
Yeah, according to what the publisher likes.
Yeah. And that's actually how most people write nowadays. That tells a lot about, you know, book industry.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing.
Yes.
Terrible thing.
Whereas in the old days, when, let's say, Alan Watts was alive, for example, and its old school style is like what you do right now. You write the cover page to the last page, entire thing, and then you shop around. Then, yeah, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. That's it.
Well, you know, I learned a lot about scholarship and being an author and how to write from people like Watts, Joseph Campbell, Aldous Huxley, Daisetsu Suzuki, these sorts of people. You know, I learned a lot from them, even though I'm not obviously a contemporary, but learned from their journey and, you know, how they wrote. And again, you have to write from the heart. When you write from the heart and you write from what you actually have to deliver, that's what the best books are. If you're writing according to what the publishing industry want, it's just going to be another one of the other books. You know, it's like if you look into the self-help section now, they're all the same book. Take your pick. It doesn't matter. They're all the same book, right? So I never wanted to fall into that category. And no one should ever do that with whatever they want to do. You ought to follow your heart and follow what's true for yourself. Problems occur, obviously, with what we're talking about today, when socialization creeps in, monetary gain creeps in, and so forth and so on, right? So, but there's ways to deal with that, right? Like, so early on, me as an author, as you know, I'm working on the side and this and that, you know, so it's not all peaches and cream, you know. A lot of people think it's peaches and cream. People think an author's life is this extravagant life. Most authors still need a day job and they still need to, you know, do things on. It's not what people think. It's not like the 60s and 70s when there wasn't many authors. So those authors would get big contracts, right?
Like someone like Thomas Cleary. He, who knows how many books he translated.
No.
He has a Harvard PhD degree in Chinese.
Yeah. I think the
Chinese
Eastern
language.
Studies.
Eastern Studies.
Yes, a lot of
things like that.
Yeah.
So if he wanted, he could be working at Harvard teaching students, right, for example. But he chose to become a house painter or something like that.
He's a painter. I think he did some carpentry.
Carpentry.
But you think he's
like
a painter?
handyman.
I think he's a painter now. He's a bit of a handyman, yeah.
Handyman. And he's fairly old now.
Yeah, he must be 70s, maybe.
And nobody can find his contact online because he doesn't have anything. But he keeps translating in his books, and somewhat that's much more. I have a much more like a respect for that sort of individual.
He epitomizes the recluse, because I tried to contact Thomas, and I even went through Shambhala, and Shambhala said, we're not allowed to give Thomas's.
Right. Yeah. Confidential.
Confidential.
Top class.
And again, like, but see, he embodies what we're talking about today.
He lives that actually lots of life, I think.
Yeah.
That's what's so like, oh wow, like it's so inspiring. That's inspiring for me.
Yeah. Prolific author.
Yeah.
Like prolific. If you look at the amount of books that he has, like not just the translations, but also ones that he has written on his own, and he hasn't just talked about Taoism and Hinduism and Buddhism. He's also translated the Quran. You know, he's a madman.
That's right.
In the best possible sense.
Yeah.
And so, but he epitomizes what we're talking about today, the love of it, without the fame and all this and that. Even I read a a written interview with him, and he like one of the reasons he really distanced himself from the public was because of the whole guru thing that has developed, and a lot of the cultish things that have developed, and you also have to remember that Thomas was writing back in the 80s and stuff like that. So when things like
with
the
caricature.
Rajneeshas and all of that were at Osho and that.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, Thomas has kept a big distance for those sorts of reasons as well. Maybe because he would be treated as a teacher as well, because he is, right? Like he,
Yes.
obviously,
yes.
like
he's a higher level
high
scholar.
level scholar. So, and he's much more content just to be a painter, write on the side, and who knows how much money he has made from his books. I'm assuming he must have made something, but he is. See, that's the embodiment of someone who doesn't have any self-esteem issues, who doesn't care about fame or fortune, but just does what he loves. That's what he loves, and that's what he does. So, and in Thomas's case, Thomas also was not in the bind of the chase and the hunt that Lao Tzu was talking about. When he gets a book done, it comes on his own time. And you'll see it in time. There's no rush, no big rush. He understands that, maybe in a couple of 100 years' time from now, he will not even be a memory. And he's happy with that.
I don't think he would...
Doesn't even care about that. You know what I mean? And that actually should be our mentality. It's actually a great relief when you think about it, that you won't be remembered. I hear a lot of people, and this comes again from the American dream culture, I need to leave my legacy. What, do you think so highly of yourself? Like, you think so
Yes.
highly of yourself that
Yes.
you think someone 200 years time from now is going to care who you were? Have a little humility, you know what I mean? Have a little bit of innocence, and don't think so highly of yourself. Don't get into things like legacy and this and that. If the legacy happens for you, usually people who leave a legacy weren't trying to leave a legacy.
That's right.
And so that's the truth. And so we have to get out of this bind of the chase and the hunt and this mentality of this fake goal that we have of who we should be, right? And we need to start to heal these problems, right? And so we have to start to, we should look at the karma and the vasanas and the samskaras, right? Like, because basically the samskaras, the subliminal imprints and mental impressions, are what are really driving us, right? Because from birth we're being conditioned. This is how you should be. This is how you should be. This is how you should be. So then your vasanas, your habits and your tendencies are naturally coming out.
Yeah.
And so your karma reflects that. Your actions reflect that.
Yeah.
And so, and not to mention what we were talking about with the nervous system. So coupled with that, you've got pretty much a pretty lethal cocktail of how our minds are mad.
Yeah.
And so, as Zhuangzi said, and the nature of Fasting the Mind, my book, is that to become healthy and sane, you have to fast your mind. You have to fast it of all of those things that you've been conditioned with. Meditation begins to help. Self-awareness begins to help. Awareness of the culture that's trying to dictate to you helps. Being aware of the habits that you have that are from the society that you're in, or the world that you're in. Vairagya helps. Keeping a distance. Mental renunciation from the habits of the world, of what you should think, and why aren't you worried about what's going on? Why do I need to be? Does that make you feel better if I'm worried with you? Let's go to the corner and worry together. Like, what is that going to make you feel better?
Or is that going to help?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. Sitting around fretting about something that's you don't know if it's going to happen or not going to happen doesn't mean anything.
Yes. And another thing is like everyone is so anxious nowadays. Is anxious about everything just to get to from A to B, or to get something done, or anything. But I think it's important to take your time and just the mentality of that you are slowly chipping away bit by bit.
Mm.
I think that idea is really helping me personally. Like, if I want to do something, just slowly chipping away, and in that one moment you'll see how much that you've done. I think that's how anything gets done in reality.
In reality, yeah.
But we just want to get it done now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if you were to just slowly chip away, then your small achievement will lead to the bigger achievement, and bigger achievement will lead to that completion of the project, whatever you were doing, right?
Yeah.
And then that approach gives you much more calming effect for your mind, and also that won't create much anxiety problems.
Yeah, well, life is process, and people don't think life is process. People think life is a linear thing where we get to a goal and this and that, but goals essentially, in some sense, are social creations, you know, because you can live without goals.
That's right.
You don't need goal. You could be completely like Zhuangzi and be completely aimless. And that also is a freeing thing as well. When you have a complete aimlessness in life, that allows your mind to be free of, you know, being goal-oriented and so forth and so on, and allows you to dive more into process itself.
That's right.
And so, and even when we look at sport, right? Some of the greatest teams in sport always focus on process, not what a goal can be achieved, right? So in the NRL in Australia, Melbourne Storm being one of the most successful clubs in the last 20 years, has really taken on a process mentality. Not about like we need to achieve this to get a try and get a goal and so forth and so on. We need to stick to the process no matter what and trust the process.
And most sporting teams will buy star players to get the results, right?
Yeah.
But that club is different.
Yeah, they just get...
They'll just get on potential and a lot to do with the character.
Character, yeah.
Meaning how much can they cope up with the discipline and the process and the system that they built.
Yeah.
So they pick based on that, and they were nobody.
Yeah,
They're no name, like really like third-tier players.
Yeah.
But they make them star players.
Star players, yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. But we're all the same. If we focus on our life as process, just like they do, there's nothing that you can't achieve. And again, if you don't achieve anything, it doesn't matter either. You have to also keep that in your mind.
Yeah.
You know, you have to always put in, like what we talked about, the quality of life, is keep that first and foremost in your mind, and understand your life as process. And some things you will achieve in life, and some things you won't. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
It depends on where you're allocating your energy. If you're allocating your energy into this, then you'll probably get places. But if your energy is scattered into a million things, I mean, you probably achieve nothing. So, but, you know, we kind of diverted a little bit there, but, but, you know, in talking about addressing these mental health problems, then we have to really come back to allowing our mind to come back into that tranquility, right? And so, and to be in that tranquility more so often than not. Yeah. If we use yoga for an example, when we look at chitta, vritti, nirodha, the vrittis are just the whirlpools of the mind in Sanskrit. So if you look at our mind as a tranquil, still water or a still lake, that's the nature of our mind, right? The vrittis are the agitation of our mind, the activity of our mind, which, you know, disturb the water and which makes us unable to see the bottom of the lake. Nirodha is the stillness, right? The stillness of the mind, chitta. And so we have to make an effort for that every day. We have to make an effort for that, is to constantly have a daily practice of where we're practicing the stilling of the mind, constantly stilling the mind, and allowing, freeing the mind from this habit of overthinking and chasing and planning and everything like that. That's where a lot of the anxiety comes from. Yeah. But that's also, like I said, that's coupled with the social principles that have been given to you as well, of the American dream and this and that. You have to really unravel all of that. You have to understand that socialization is warping your nature, your pure nature. You are pure from birth. You still are pure. You're fundamentally good. But you've bought on this, you've bought this idea on, you've subscribed to this idea that you're not fundamentally good. So in a sense, most societies in the world are fundamentally Confucian because you've built a self-cultivation model where a lot of the mind sciences, Vedanta, Taoism, and the sects of Buddhism are built in on the deconstructing of yourself. And then you'll become actually useful in becoming useless.
That's right.
But it's diametrically opposed, right, to
Yeah.
the modern model. So.
Yeah. We get influenced by the society and culture, and also most closely by our family members think it's good, especially the parents. Parents will give you certain ideas since you're at a young age, and what's good and what's bad and this and that. But once you become a certain age, when you can discern what's good for you and what's not good for you, it's actually important to be independent of your parents' ideas of what's good and bad, because that's what they think is good or bad, not necessarily good or bad for you.
Yeah.
So that understanding is also important, that not to get influenced by other ideas outside of your own self.
And I think that if you're stilling the mind constantly, that clarity will come. You'll be able to see that much clearer. See, when your mind is caught up in the hum of existence, you start to submit to maybe what parents want from you, what society wants from you, what culture wants from you. But when you have full clarity, you are okay to say, that's okay, I see where you're coming from, but that's not for me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is what I have to do in my life. There's much more at play here than what you want for me.
Yeah.
You know, there were the decisions that you made a long time ago with your family, and other people make also as well. I made with my family as well, right? With my siblings. So you have to have that real confidence in doing that as well. You know, you have to understand that it's all good. See, we live in a life where it's not all good. But you have to understand, it's all good. It's okay. It doesn't matter what crap's going on. Even with all this crap that's happening on now, it's all good.
Yep.
It's all good.
Again, people have this habit of judging themselves whether they're doing good or bad, right? But there is no such thing.
No.
There is not any moral standard that we need to uphold. There is no such thing.
No.
It's just all concepts and ideas, and they're just...
That's an Abrahamic view.
We are just conditioned by it, and we have to let that go.
Yeah, definitely. It's all good, man. It's all good. There's nothing to... Again, if your focus in life is just to be a good person, just to be a loving, caring, a person who has fun, who enjoys self-exploration and enjoys the deeper essence of life, your life's going to be all good. Everyone's life is all good anyway, even the ones who aren't into that, but they don't know that. They're caught in this bind of, that there's all these problems and they're out there fighting and, playing identity politics, trying to play the victim and all of these things that are highly immature. And so if you're a person who is achieving spiritual maturity, those things become comical for you because you're in a sense really grounding yourself in the nature of reality and getting out of this mindset of that I'm this person that's important, this self-image, and you're letting go of that. Like I said, vairagya is very important, mental renunciation of worldliness and also mental renunciation of the constructed self that you've created for yourself, the Maya construction you've created for yourself.
And also I think that it's important to know that even this spiritual maturity process itself is a long term, it's a lifetime.
Yeah, lifetime thing, yeah. It's a process.
Yeah, it's not something that you expect yourself of get it straight away. Just you slowly chipping away day by day, and a week from now you can reflect on how much you advanced from then and now and things like that. So it's just small steps, and it's just a constant process of growth.
Yeah, of course.
And again, like you and I know that how much joy in it. So it's very enjoyable process. And again, like actually this famous ballerina said something like this, and she danced until she was like late 40s, and she's one of these really like respected ballerina in Germany, where she danced for her basically lifetime, her career. And she said, it would be pretty boring to live if there was such thing as perfection. So that kind of sums up everything. Like how much she enjoyed to reach that standard that she set up for herself. So it's spiritual practice is the same, I think. To become an individual and a human being that you want to be, just the process itself is a very enjoying process.
Yeah.
And while we're doing it, on the way, we get to love one another. We get to love life. We get to love yourself, forgiving yourself, all these great qualities. And yeah, it's a great, again, journey.
It's a journey, yeah. Again, it's like, when you think about your own existence, it's like a marination. It's like a fermentation process where you're constantly maturing, and, like maturity doesn't really have a goal, right? Like it's like a constant process of like a deepening process. You're going deeper and deeper into the nature of being, and life is completely different where you are at that point as opposed to 10 years before. Yeah. That's the nature of existence. That's the nature of growth and being alive. And so the spiritual process, with what we're talking about today, is that subtle process of maturing and deepening and seeing the joy in life, actually, and extracting as much joy as possible from existence, because there's a lot of joy out there. There's only joy, actually. If you're focusing on all the other nonsense and your mind's being held hostage by other people who don't understand they're free, and you want to get out of that, and you want to steer clear of those sorts of people, because they want you to be negative and grim with them. Yeah. And we don't need any more of that. It's so easy. You and I talk about all this all the time on the podcast. It's so easy to be nice to each other. Just be nice. It's amazing that when you just start to be nice to one another, how different life is. But if you're one of those people who are just constantly negative and an internet troll, and you're just there waiting for anything, and you're attracted to cancel culture and all of these immature things that have developed online, you're being held hostage to a certain mentality that will never experience joy, never experience bliss, which is your nature. No matter how angry you get, doesn't matter how much verbal diarrhea you spew on the internet, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. You're trying to sound profound. You're trying to cancel other people out to make yourself feel better. But at the end of the day, when you put your head on the pillow at night, you're as empty as ever. And that's one of the things that we need to think about, because you brought up process, is that when we have a lot of goals and we have a lot of mentalities that we think that we need to fulfill, usually when we get to that stage, it's an empty feeling. And a lot of the time, it is that, because of that, why it's like that is because we're kind of like in a rush in the process, and almost unconscious in the process, because we were just quickly trying to get there. And it's okay to get there in a quick manner, as long as that you were present and aware during the process and you really enjoyed that. As I mentioned with my own books, right? For myself, what I've sensed the most joy from is from actually handwriting the book and remembering the experiences you and I were having there, as opposed to the finished product. Even though don't get me wrong, that's great as well, but the process is a lot.
That's actually the fun part, isn't it?
Has a lot more fun in it.
Formulating your ideas and put it down into words, and that whole process itself is much more enjoyable, actually.
It is really enjoyable, yeah. People just got to, and again, when you're thinking about process, you have to get the American dream out of your mind. American dream is a goal. Got to get out of goals. Nature itself is non-linear, and that's what a lot of people need to understand. It's non-linear. We're building a whole world based on a linear perspective, straight lines, and this is how it is. And it's like, but everything else in nature is cyclical. Everything else in nature is a circle, is a spiral.
Yes.
And so just because you think that way, you think everything in the world is that way. But it's not that way.
Yes.
Even your thinking is non-linear. It goes in loops.
Yes.
And so I talk about this in enlightenment now. So you get out of that bad habit of thinking in a linear manner. And enlightenment in itself is not actually a goal. It's a non-linear realization. It's a realization that's always been there.
Yeah.
And so having a goal for that actually eclipses the actual recognition of it. And that's actually how it is with all of us in life as well. Having a goal for whatever we're trying to achieve actually eclipses the experience of the process and the journey that we're having.
Yeah, that's right. You missing out on it.
You're missing out on all the joy.
Yes.
All the joy and all the happiness that you get from it.
You just got blind by just the goal itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
It is. Well, that's what the Eastern spiritual paths can do, right? They can just bring the realization that, and take your mind out of that bad habit of thinking in that manner, and so.
Yeah. It's again, I think it's the ultimate solution for your mind, for anyone's mind. It's not momentary. It's not just motivational. It's everlasting process. It's a lifetime project, and that's why it's very challenging. But at the same time, that's why it's so joyful. So that make that as a priority for our own health and sanity, and first and foremost is happiness. So to satisfy with where we are and our life is that's why it's a most important thing for anyone to practice, really.
Well, like we mentioned at the start, like psychiatry, psychology, addressing these things of the personal nature are in some sense band-aid solutions.
And it is.
It is, yeah.
And it is.
Where we need heart surgery.
That's right.
And Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism are like surgery of the heart. Like you're going straight to the core of the problem, and let's just address the core of the problem and see what happens after that.
That's right. And again, as you know, like for me personally, I try to get over what happened in the past and this and that. And researching many things on psychology and this and that. Of course, it helps somewhat, but once I found meditation and Eastern traditional wisdom, is like it's not as simple as how psychology or psychiatrists say about the problem. It's much more complex and comprehensive, and there's so much more to know, other than just about your mind, because everything is connected. The reason why you suffer is because of a culture and socialization. And then things to know about that as well, culture and socialization. How did that come about? Why is it the way it is? It becomes much more complex. But in the search of knowing this knowledge, there is great joy in it. So, and from experiencing that joy, from studying these things, actually, that itself is curing your mental problem. Actually, that itself is a healing.
It's healing itself. Yeah.
Because there's so much enjoyment in it.
Yeah, exactly. It is. Yeah. Well, it's like unraveling a big Christmas gift. You see it and you're unwrapping it, but the wrapping takes a while.
Yeah, that's right.
The wrapping takes a while, but it's surely in there.
Yeah.
It's surely in there.
Yeah, that's right. You'll see, surely.
Yeah. But like you said, the study of yourself is actually a great liberator, right? The process of that.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned the other day, with you and I talking privately, even like reading itself, right? Studying itself, because you start to know more about what your problem is, in air quotes, and the nature of yourself. The right knowledge,
Yeah.
obviously.
You're somewhat spending a lot more time in your own thoughts while you're reading.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're connecting dots,
Mm.
and you're absorbing the new information,
Mm.
and you try to make some sense of some things that you
Mm.
always had a problem with, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And that becomes accumulative.
Mm.
Then you have more knowledge and
Mm.
more self-knowledge, of course.
Mm.
So it's just it's a great process.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you couple that with meditation, right diet, whatever suits you diet, again, you don't want to make any sort of, this diet is the right diet. What diet works for you? Make sure it's as clean as possible, obviously, and sufficient sleep.
Yeah.
Actually, if you have
Rest.
rest and exercise, if you have the four fundamentals, you have meditation, sleep, exercise, and nutrition. If you have those four things taken care of, anything can happen in your life. And actually, you won't suffer from any sort of mental affliction.
No.
And I know that sounds basic, but it's kind of funny because when we were talking about the busyness of life, how difficult it is for people
Yeah.
just to follow that.
Although that's fundamental, it's so hard to achieve.
Yeah. Because you ask
100%.
people, you say, did you do your 20 minutes? I'm only asking 20 minutes meditation. Did you do it today? And people go, I just didn't have time. 20 minutes? You didn't have time for 20 minutes? Did you at least go for a walk? You didn't go for a walk. Okay. So like the society is an asylum, is a place, is a playing field for insanity. And that's what we need to understand. The society itself, socialization, and the way we've structured the world can only breed insane people.
Yeah.
And the ones who remain sane are the ones who have the healthiest lifestyle and are trying to understand themselves, also in relation to it as well. And so that's what we all need to do, right?
Yeah.
So I think we've pretty much covered it all. And so, guys, I hope you enjoyed. Let us know what you think about this podcast. Drop a comment and make sure you check out my Patreon page or my PayPal account if you feel like contributing to the channel. And we've got a lot of good things coming up this year. And we won't let you know what those are yet. And my new book will be out this year as well. So you'll know about that in time. And guys, have a good week, and we'll see you guys next week.